Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 11 o'clock session. This is on workflow strategies. We have two great presenters in this session. So the Josephs, I'm super excited to see these presentations. These guys are going to be great. In case you're wondering, something happened here. Let me try again. Well, let's just get into this. Joseph Kerski is our first presenter. He's a GIS professional and educator and geographer with a focus on GIS and education, serving in all four sectors of society: private industry, government, nonprofit, and academia. And so without further ado, I'm just going to turn it right over to you, Joseph, if you can share your screen. Yeah, okay.
Greetings all, Joseph Kerski here with you. Yeah, very excited to be with you all. Thanks, Jamie and all of your colleagues for having us today. I serve on the ESRI education team. So I wanted to mention, especially if you've got kids, you know people with kids, you teach adjunct at a university or a community or a technical or a tribal college, that is the focus of our team, is supporting educators, students, deans, campus facility managers, anybody in education, libraries, museums, anybody in the world of education, supporting their use of geotechnology. So that's been our mission since 1992. It's education, sustainability, and science, just like our whole organization. So if there's anything we could do to help you and your colleagues advance GIS and spatial thinking in the world of education and beyond, that's what we're here for. So I think it's because I spent basically from the Holocene to from the Cretaceous to the Holocene, let's say that, in federal agencies producing data, USGS, Census Bureau, NOAA. I think it's partly because of that, but I suspect that all of you share this sort of love of geospatial data and how to get it. And then how do I know if it's any good? And what about societal issues around that data, copyright and location privacy and other societal issues? So that's why I was very pleased that Jamie and her colleagues wanted to have this session, because as many of you know, even if you've only been using GIS for a while, in the past, it was extremely difficult to get data and to format the data and project the data into the place that you could start doing analysis on that data, correct? And one could argue that the evolution of geospatial technologies into the 2020s has been wonderful, hasn't it? Cloud-based software, we've got streaming and open data portals, and other advancements that might lend an argument to, well, do we really need a session like this, Joseph? I would argue that yes, we do, because with the plethora of ArcGIS Hub sites and other open data portals, it's almost like this other side of the data challenge. In the past, it was too little data, and how do we get it into the format that we can use? There's still some of the how do I get it in the format that I can actually use it, but now it's this literal flood of data, right, from a variety of sources, many of which are real time, that because of that, it's sort of, I think we still need a session like this. So here are some strategies for finding and assessing geospatial data that I hope are useful in this short time that we actually have together, in these 4 hours that we have together. Just kidding, we don't have 4 hours together. In this short time, I'm hoping that these resources and these strategies will be helpful. I've got my contact information that I'll share at the end of this presentation, or maybe in the chat box as well. So if there's any questions, feel free to share those right now, and we'll get to those. So again, a couple reasons why we need this. In addition to what I've already said, well, data needs are often very specialized, right? In theme, scale, region, attributes, and other characteristics. And so it's sometimes difficult to find a thread of someone who's tried to get the data, the same kind of data that you have. There's a lot of sharing in the geospatial world these days, right? But sometimes we don't share our methods of gathering and assessing data that I think we should. Also in research articles or conference proceedings, hey, I want to get that data that person X shared yesterday. How do I get that? And how do I get that efficiently? Because person A has gone to the trailblazing, time-consuming task, perhaps, of gathering, can they share those strategies with me? So I think there's still a lot that we could make progress on in terms of saving time in this area. So again, I hope this workshop is useful. And also, it's difficult with all the blog posts and guidelines and so on and so forth out there. It's challenging to learn from other strategies in this area. So when I, probably like many of you, get requests like this about how do I find data on topic X or region Y, I oftentimes, again, like I'm sure all of you do, tailor the response to the data requester, do my utmost to make it very tailored and focused. But I think there's some elements here that I hope to draw out in this presentation, mini workshop, if you will, that I hope will be helpful. First and foremost, I think it's worth saying that, and I'm going to put this whole story map of mine because it's got some links into the chat box, and maybe my colleagues in Arizona can share those with you. But having a clear vision, it's just like when you go out in the field. You know, what are you going to collect? What units are you going to use? What field equipment are you going to use? What tools you're going to use to gather data? I think in terms of data strategies, oftentimes we sort of forget those best practices and we just sort of plunge in to the web and try to find things. And there's certainly nothing wrong with the sort of grocery store kind of behavior that I'm indicating right now, where you're just sort of wandering around. Now, this is a little bit of a geeky thing that I'm going to share. I actually have a map now of the grocery store that I visit most often with, I don't know why it took me decades to figure out, Joseph, make a map of the store, and then you know where exactly everything. So on my map, I've got all the items that I need because I know exactly where they are, or usually where they are in the store. Anyway, I think there's some value still in browsing data sites, as long as you put a time limit on that. Because sometimes this browsing is sort of like when you're in the grocery store, you find something, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that was a product. Maybe I'll try that. You know, so there's still some discovery and ideas that you can generate from doing that browsing in the grocery store and the browsing of geospatial data portals of various kinds. But still, I think it's worthwhile to spend the kind of time that we usually do going out in the field to plan your data search strategy and putting a time limit on it. Because it's like a paper that you write or a conference presentation that you prepare for, like this one here at AGIC. It tends to occupy whatever space that could be available. And so putting a time limit, I think, is useful. Also, though, once you've carefully thought about your needs and your requirements, then and also what you will and will not accept in terms of spatial data accuracy, attribute completeness, and all those other things that are in the sort of federal geographic metadata standards that we could talk about for a moment, but I think those are good guidelines for our data search. Then you're ready to search. And while you're searching, here is a useful aid that it's kind of a simple aid, but I oftentimes use it. It's a graphical aid in deciding whether geospatial data meets your needs. And all these links are linked to this main story map that I'm showing you right now. So you don't have to write all this stuff down. But you can see this kind of a simple graphic, but a useful one, I think. What do you need to do with the data? How useful is that data set going to be? And sort of a decision tree along each step of the way. Certainly one could make this a lot more complicated, but I kind of like its simplicity, which is why I tend to refer to it as I'm doing here in this presentation. And if I had to suggest a one-stop first place to go, I would suggest the Living Atlas of the World. I really would. Even if I didn't work at Esri, I'd still suggest the Living Atlas of the World. Why? Because it's not Esri content. It's not Joe Peters and my content. It's all of you, all of y'all. Ustedes, vous, tú, right? It's the community contributing to this Living Atlas. Authoritative data sources from state, federal, local agencies, nonprofit organizations, academia, government agencies of various kinds, private companies, all contributing to this subset, if you will, of the ArcGIS Online open platform. Now, ArcGIS Online, there's no Esri or other person saying you can't put that data there, you can't put that data there. It is a completely open platform. And therefore, because of the thousands and thousands of things that are contributed daily, literally daily to that platform, you've got a whole wide variety of data quality there. So the Living Atlas of the World is a subset of it, that's from authoritative agencies. Now, one of the things that I wanted to emphasize in this presentation is that, especially those of you that are new to GIS, you got to keep this in mind. We are living on a very complex, ever-changing, dynamic planet, aren't we? And because it's an oblate spheroid, right from the get-go, maps are representations of reality. They're very useful representations, but they're representations nonetheless. The point is, even the living atlas of the world from authoritative agencies, the Arizona Geographic, the Land Office, the NOAA, the United Nations Environment Program, CDC, et cetera, that data has benefits and it also has limitations. All spatial data has limitations. So the idea when you're searching and then assessing data is, how can I manage the error that is inherent in that data set? Is that error enough to prevent me from deeming it being useful for my project, right? Every project's got its own data requirements in terms of spatial accuracy, attribute completeness, and so on, right? So you've got to keep that in mind. Even the living atlas of the world, as useful as it is, it will have metadata. That's one of the advantages of it. It's authoritative sources, not perfect, but authoritative. And it's got metadata, rich metadata in it. I never metadata I didn't like. That was a bad geo pun. Anyway, the point is, it's got metadata there so that you can use it to make an informed decision on whether to use it. But it also has its limitations in there, the accuracy standards that were used to generate that information. So I would really start with the living atlas of the world for several reasons. A, it's got the metadata that you need. B, it is from these authoritative scientific and cartographic, geographic agencies and data providers. It's ever changing, so it's the living implies also not just the dynamic Earth, but it's updated daily with sources. It's not every single source, because then it would just be the same as ArcGIS Online. It is a subset, about 8,500 data layers in there. You can also search by the type of item, story map, layer, image source, tile, survey, form, etc. in there. So it's a very useful resource. And also, even if you're not an Esri ArcGIS kind of user, even if you're using some other GIS, I think it's still useful because you've got a variety of ways that you can access the data. Streaming versus downloading for one, different data formats for another. So I think there's a variety of reasons why I say start with the living atlas of the world. This is something that I know this sounds a little bit geeky, but when I was at all those federal agencies in the past that I mentioned, we sort of always dreamed about, wouldn't it be great if we had this portal that people could consume information, some of which they want to download and some they stream, and have it fed directly into your GIS in most cases. Well, the living atlas of the world does have its limitations. It's not a end all be all, and I'll share some other resources, but it is as close as I can think of to that, again, sort of geeky dream I know that many of us had in the past of wanting something that was instantly useful. So I would highly recommend spending some time there. Also, even before the health crisis necessitated people putting data portals on COVID status in their community, ArcGIS Hub started to be a rising useful tool that more and more communities used for their data portals. Again, it has its limitations, but the nice thing about it, I think, is that you've got a common look and feel in many of these hub sites. They usually offer some sort of array of download and streaming options. I oftentimes start with my area of interest and then GIS data portal or ArcGIS Hub for my search terms on the web as one of hundreds of examples. And I know there's hundreds of great examples in Arizona. One of these hub sites would be for a typical county government and having this kind of look and feel. When you go down to a theme, you've got a variety of things that you can choose from. You've got the sources, you've got whether you want to stream or download it. You've oftentimes I want to view it in a web browser, Joseph. I just want to view it in something like ArcGIS Online so I can at least look at what it's going to look like before I actually decide whether to use it or not. So these hub sites are they're easy to set up on that side of things. We're not really talking about setting up one of these in this workshop, but consuming it from the data user's perspective, really wonderful to see these. So I would say that as one of the common search strategies, get into one of these hub sites if you can. There's also, along those lines, some useful starting points, such as the hub gallery. Sometimes I start there. If I don't know what the agency or organization that's going to host one of these data sets, I oftentimes start with this ArcGIS Hub search starting point, because here you've got, as you can see here, you've got hundreds of thousands of just results in the hub site gallery. And this isn't all of the hubs, but this is a sample of them. And so oftentimes I start here when I don't know exactly what organization is going to host the data that I need. So this is the hub gallery site with search capabilities. Okay, very nice to know. And again, hopefully that's useful. Then another thing that I wanted to recommend as a strategy is I know this sounds super boring, but I've got a book and a blog that I co-wrote with a colleague. This blog is called the Spatial Reserves Data Blog. And my colleague and I wrote this book for Esri Press called The GIS Guide to Public Domain Data. It's kind of near and dear to my heart, and I know to many of yours, but for most people, it'd be like, you're writing about data? But really, it's so important because these data portals evolve, GIS is evolving, the ways to access them, the data needs that people have are constantly evolving. And so in this blog, Spatial Reserves, every 2 weeks, I have a new post in here, and so does my colleague. So the last one I wrote was revisiting the National Atlas of the USA. Hey, I still get these requests. Joseph, remember the National Atlas? That was such an incredible site from the USGS, for example. Is that data still around? The layers, the resources, and so on, rivers, population, et cetera. Yes, and here are some guidelines as to how to access that data that was in the National Atlas. So that's just one of my recent posts, actually from yesterday. But more germane to our topic today, I have several top 10 or top 7 resources where I've actually reviewed these. And again, it's a little bit subjective because your review might not be the same as my review, but I think like many of you, I have a whole wide variety of data needs. And I'm in education, as you know, so I'm physical geography, cultural geography, anthropology, business, health, all across the board, all kinds of different disciplines. So in that respect, I'm kind of probably like many of you that I want to look at a variety of data sources. So some of these top lists with my own, not just what the source is, but how easy is it to use and how useful is it to use might be helpful. So here's my top 7 satellite imagery sources, for example. How do I get those? So that's that one. Another top is most useful, again, in my view, Landsat image sites, okay? And another one is the top 10 most useful geospatial data portals. You can see some of the threads that I've already shared here. The number 2 one here is I got the Living Atlas of the World in here. I've got the Open Data Portal based on ArcGIS Hub technology, Season, the ESA's Sentinel Online Data Portal, the Atlas of the Biosphere. There's some global data sets in here that oftentimes are very useful for studies. So the most useful geospatial data portals. So I wanted to say that if you as sort of a top level strategy, to go to some of these lists. And if these do not net fruitful results, then dig into portals organized by theme. So for example, the World Resources Institute on land use and natural resources. So if you've got a theme, there are certain organizations that are keen on developing data for those themes. And so land use and natural resources, okay, I know certain organizations that are focused on those themes, and I start there. So oftentimes I start with the theme and then figure out what the organization or organizations are, in this case, WRI. Then another strategy is portal, kind of along the same lines, but portals organized by location. So for example, if you know that you've got a need for historical OS data for the UK, well, there's an ordnance survey, right? That's the National Mapping Agency, analogous to the USGS over here in the USA. Oregon, Los Angeles, the small city of Oak Hill, West Virginia. So sometimes it's okay finding out where that local data or that regional or state agency data is going to be located. And lastly, because more and more research is actually tied to geospatial data, and I've written a couple of posts about this recently, when you start searching, this is a bit more difficult to find, which is why I have it further down in the list. But looking at conference proceedings, articles, and related literature, in the past, it was extremely difficult to find the sources. You read a study that someone did on, I don't know, climate and vegetation in, I don't know, the Colorado Plateau in Arizona. How do you find the data that they used? One of the criticisms in these articles that I refer to here is that people don't oftentimes, other than putting in the bibliography, they don't actually give you guidance on where they got their data and how you can actually get the same data for your own study. So that being said, there is some pressure now in the academic community and in other circles for people to list not just their data sources, but how you can access the same data, and oftentimes coupling that data in the article itself as a an attachment or a compendium on a website, etc. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is that you dig, and sometimes you don't find what you need. Going to research articles might yield some fruitful results, but be tenacious, as I say here. Oftentimes the data sources are listed at the end. Sometimes they're published in a poster or other sort of ephemeral literature that's very difficult to tease out, but be tenacious. And sometimes it will require you to do some 20th century methods, actually calling someone on the phone saying, you're really interested in the data for X, Y, and Z reasons. And as you know, the geospatial community is a very nurturing kind of geo-mentoring kind of community. And so I have had great results contacting authors for data. And a couple additional words of advice here as I close out in the last 3 minutes or so. Just like there's no often single best source for one topic on the web, no single geospatial gold mine that is the end-all site for geospatial data exists. The Living Atlas of the World, in my view, comes relatively close to that. But it's actually a good thing that there's just not one site. Remember geospatial, one stop and data.gov. I mean, those are still, well, data.gov is still there, and I've used it for zebra mussels and some other things, and it's fairly useful. But because there's not a one stop, it actually forces you and I as data users to think critically about the data sets that we are considering, that we need. And choices abound, which is a good thing. But they require you to investigate and evaluate. Be critical of the data is one of the themes that I'm always threading into these workshops. In this story map, I have some examples then following, as you'll see here, and I don't have time to go into it all, but examples of these strategies in action. Here's a sample data request I recently received. We're looking for the following data for an area: soil moisture, precipitation, stream flow, groundwater, reservoir levels, temperature, ag health, and water use. So I list how I found those things and the results in each case. So just as an example. Now, last topic, but I think an important one. I'm going to give it short shrift here in the workshop, but how then can you determine whether the data is of sufficient quality to meet your needs? It's the whole fitness for use thing. On spatial accuracy, I've got a reflection on that. I've also got 2 everyday examples of being critical of the data. Now that I know some sources, how then can I effectively evaluate those so that I can determine whether that is going to be fit for my project, fit for my use, thinking about who my audience is, my data requirements, my project requirements, the time that I have, the staff that I have, the budget that I have, and so on. And also on that whole note of being critical of the data, I have a couple of posts about imagery that you need to be wise consumers. I think the overall message here is being wise consumers of data. Yes, there's a lot of data out there, and I hope these strategies have been helpful as you navigate these waters. Questions, comments, issues?
Wow, Joseph, you crammed in so much great stuff in that little bitty time. And we do have a couple questions. So I will post one in here so you can read it also while I read it. The question is, what do you think of new technologies such as, in particular, virtual reality? How are they going to affect or change in positive in the future of the GIS world? And do you think that the approach should remain more traditional or more open to them?
Well, very good question. I wrote this post not too long ago on that very topic, where I was investigating a solution from Arcgis Solution, which is one of our business partners, about how do I integrate augmented reality in this case into my field workflow. How can I do that? So for example, my simple examples were, I've got a standard photograph here on the left, and then I'm using this particular solution on the right, where I can see traffic accidents, storm drains, tree species, not only that my local communities have collected, cities and counties, but also that I've collected with Survey 123. And I want to see that as I'm panning just my regular smartphone around on the landscape. But I think you're raising a good point. This is just one example of new technologies in GIS that are really rocking the boat, right? And there have been notable examples in the past about people using Second Life and some other sort of virtual experiences where you go to this room and then you explore data. Probably like many of you, you view those things with a critical eye. Is it going to take hold? Is it going to be helpful for me in terms of saving me time? It may be interesting, but if it actually ends up being more time than my traditional ways of searching for data, I personally don't have time to investigate it, as cool as it may sound. So I think we should, and this is a great community about being open to new ideas about searching and hosting and exploring. We want the freedom, but we also want to save time. That's kind of the tension point, right? We want the freedom to choosing our data sources. And fortunately, we're living in an age where more and more data sources are becoming available. But as you folks are keenly aware, depending on the theme and depending on where in the world you are interested in, it is a vastly diverse landscape in terms of, can you get the data? Is it copyrighted? Do you have to pay royalties on it? Is it releasable? All kinds of other considerations. And then on the hosting side, can you release that data? Right? Is it sensitive? Is it blocked? Is it something you cannot release? You know, I'm a member of the caving community. Can you just publish a data set on locations of caves? No, there's a National Cave Protection Act for good reason. So there's all kinds of considerations there. And I'm glad you brought that up. You folks are great.
Okay, the next question. In our enterprise system, we have Living Atlas data, but the only layers available are owned by Esri_Living Atlas. To get the other layers that are available in ArcGIS Online, I have to upload the content to Enterprise. Is there another way to get the data?
Interesting. So yeah, maybe we should talk offline more about this. You don't have access to the whole body of content in the Living Atlas. Interesting. Yeah, send me an email. I don't want you to be left in the lurch here, and I might be able to. I'll get some colleagues if I can't sufficiently answer the question to help you out here. Yep, good, very good question.
Great, Joe. So is it okay for me to post your
Yep.
email address in the chat for everybody? Okay.
Yeah, and feel free to post that the story map as well.
Already did that.
Oh, you're so good.
Got that ahead of time. Okay.
Well, I want to leave some room for my colleague here, Joe Peters, and I'd love to come down there and, you know, we can actually touch, you know, Colorado. I'm in Colorado. Here's Western Colorado, my homeland. We touch at the four corners. So we could put 1 foot in Colorado and 1 foot in Arizona, but I'd love to come down there again soon, as I have been in the past, to visit you all face to face. In the meantime, I wish you all success with your wonderful projects, innovative community that you've got down there. And yeah, wish you all the best, folks. Keep in touch. Thanks,
Thank you,
Jamie.
Joseph. Thank you, Joseph. Really appreciate it. All your work with us in the presentation. All right, you guys, that was a great presentation. I mean, I'm still kind of starstruck that I'm in here with these two great presenters. So forgive my being a little bit flummoxed here. So that was really great, some great strategies, and that's going to lead us right into our next amazing presenter, Joe Peters, who is also from Esri. He is the Esri ArcGIS Workflow Manager and is a scalable enterprise workflow management system that automates and simplifies many aspects of performing and managing repeatable GIS and non-GIS work in an organization. Whew, that was a lot to say. That's what ArcGIS Workflow Manager is. And you know what? I think I'm just going to turn this over to Joe Peters because he's going to tell us all about how to use the ArcGIS Workflow Manager to optimize the production of your GIS work. And again, if you guys have questions before I flip it over to you, Joe, please put them in the Q&A and we will get them to Joe to answer. Off to you.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. And thank you, Dr. Kersky. That was a really awesome presentation. It stinks that I have to follow it, but sometimes that's the way it goes. I was thinking during that presentation, I don't know if anyone's participating in November, there's the 30-day map challenge, which I took part in last year. The resources that Dr. Kersky just shared would be a really great resource for that. So Jamie, can you let me know, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. It's sharing, seems to be sharing fine.
Okay, great. So thanks everyone. Again, my name is Joe Peters. My email address is here. I'm a solution engineer with Esri. I support local governments in Arizona. So I work with a lot of the local government customers in Arizona that work with Esri technology. And I'm going to be talking to you today about ArcGIS Workflow Manager and how it can be used to optimize the production of your GIS work. So this will be an overview, and specifically, I'll be focusing on the new service-driven architecture. So as Jamie just mentioned, ArcGIS Workflow Manager is Esri's solution for helping organizations become more productive by automating and simplifying repeatable GIS and non-GIS work. And so what does it mean to be a repeatable process? And they tend to follow these 4-stage patterns where work is submitted, that submission is reviewed, it's completed, the results are delivered. The steps to perform this work might be on the web, or they might be in a desktop application. They might even occur in a distributed work environment, especially the last couple of years. That's been, almost all work environments are distributed now. They may also include a mixture of automated activities. They may use different people with different levels of training, understanding, different software products. So once you have a process like this modeled out, it might become difficult to scale it. So you can perform it 100 times, 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and do that successfully. So often there's bottlenecks, they get magnified, the process slows down, mistakes happen, quality drops. So with Workflow Manager, this is where it comes in to streamline a production process and act as an orchestration factory. So goals with this product are to help improve quality, improve trust in the process. That will hopefully reduce a lot of the manual repetitive work so users can actually focus on impactful work that is meaningful to them. And so also by capturing the business process, we're capturing the tradecraft that goes into it. And that's makes things a lot easier for onboarding new staff and less devastating when you lose existing staff. And I know there's a lot of that going on right now. So that is a very important thing for organizations to consider. And what makes Workflow Manager different is of course, the spatial nature. So we use the work location effectively in our analysis and reporting. And we're of course, tightly integrated with the rest of the ArcGIS system. And so before I dive into any technical aspects of Workflow Manager, I just want to take a minute and highlight some of the use cases that we have in mind for this product. So one of the big ones is submission and approval workflows for the web, things like permitting, incident reporting, data submission. Workflow Manager is also really great for data editing. And really, this is where the original product, the desktop version was born, especially when working with complex data models, things like the utility network, parcel fabric, pipeline referencing, roads and highways. So performing things that maybe handle new data input, maybe doing service drops, infrastructure build outs, and doing that all the way through from design to construction and project completion. And then another aspect of Workflow Manager is the ability to automate work. So just automated orchestration, having a system that does most of the work for you. Maybe it's stringing together a set of processes from data ingestion, maybe running some geoprocessing tools, and maybe only notifying you if input is needed or if an error is detected, maybe something's wrong with the data set that didn't validate, et cetera. But we can automate tasks with this as well. And I think that's a very important aspect of it. And we've historically released a Geodatabase deployment of Workflow Manager. So folks on the line might be familiar with the Geodatabase deployment that is now actually known as Workflow Manager Classic. This was primarily focused on cadastral mapping workflows. And this deployment's actually still supported. And it's hopefully folks that are using it are successful with it. And if you're still using it today, we hope you're loving it and benefiting from a lot of work has actually gone into it in the last year, especially finishing off parity with ArcGIS Pro. But last year, we did release a new service-driven deployment that is focused on new use cases, focused on that tight integration with ArcGIS Enterprise, areas of differentiation, so that we can actually mature this technology. And the focus is on gradual improvement. So if you're using Classic, it might be a good time to start considering transitioning. It depends on your use case, feature requirements, those kinds of things. Definitely one of those things where you'd want to maybe chat with Esri representatives, could even be myself, and just kind of see if it's a good time or not. So the ultimate vision for this is to allow organizations to create their own seamless end-to-end workflows. That could be all across ArcGIS for completing your work, and whether it's going from web to mobile to the desktop, or just, as I mentioned earlier, purely automated activities. The goal is kind of to become the glue of ArcGIS technology. And as I mentioned previously, with this service-driven architecture, which is a new capability, this is a new server role within the ArcGIS Enterprise system. When you deploy this server role, you get instances of Workflow Manager that become items in your portal. We have a new web app with web pages that focus on specific tasks like performing monitoring, administration work, those kinds of things. There's also a new Pro extension. So some aspects of a workflow might be pushed over to ArcGIS Pro, and that'd be a really good example with the parcel fabric or the utility network, where we might want to push work into ArcGIS Pro so that somebody can update a feature, maybe a parcel layer, maybe some attributes within a parcel record, et cetera. We also are still maintaining the extensibility opportunities for folks that maybe want to build your own apps or widgets and just simply leverage the server as an underlying architecture and framework. And then just a small note on licensing. We're licensing this. You license the server role itself, and then we're licensing user type extensions. So that's each user of Workflow Manager will get a user type extension. And this is similar to what you'll see with our utilities and parcel mapping. And hopefully the benefits would be somewhat obvious with going from this desktop version of Workflow Manager into this services-driven architecture. And this is something that you're seeing across our system. We're doing that with a lot of workflows, migrating into this service-driven architecture so it can be accessed anywhere. Accessed in mobile applications, in web applications, in the desktop as we're used to. It makes things responsive, hopefully easy to use. So it's pretty simple to get started with workflows, get those workflows moved into production. There's also a really big focus on resiliency and deployability and making it easy to upgrade from version to version. And we're also focusing a lot on the platform integration, as well as a lot of new capabilities. And I'll mention some of those capabilities towards the end of my presentation. And I'm going to actually show short videos. The product manager of Workflow Manager put together a really great demo, probably better than I could show you today. So I decided to go the video route. But the demo I'm going to show you is focused on submission and approval. And so the general workflow, which is similar to that slide I showed earlier here, is a really good example of that 4 states of submit, review, complete, and deliver workflow. So the scenario here would be that we're submitting a request for an environmental permit to a local government. In this use case, it could be that a permit is submitted. We might want to look at if that request is actually close to a water source. Maybe if it is, we will, if it isn't, rather, we'll go ahead and just complete the submission. If it is close to a water source, we might need to fill in some additional information. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to this video, if that's all right with everybody, and just have Arthi, who's the product manager of Workflow Manager, kind of show you some ins and outs of it.
You can easily access Workflow Manager from ArcGIS Enterprise. Once you have your workflow server configured and your license set up, just look for the Workflow Manager icon in the app launcher for ArcGIS Enterprise portal. Clicking on it will take you to our Open Item page. This is where you'll access items that were created for you or create a new item. For this demo, I'll be using an existing item. Once in, you'll be taken to our work page. And like the name suggests, this is where all the work happens. On the work page, you can find, filter, and run work that is assigned to you. You can see that I have 2 job queries, my jobs and my group jobs, to easily find jobs that are assigned to me or my group. We have out-of-the-box filters available here to filter through some of our jobs. High priority, that tells you jobs that have a high priority, jobs that were created in the last 24 hours, or jobs that are past their due date. You can also see that there are a few jobs that are already assigned to me. I can either start a new step or resume a step that I was working on yesterday. For our demo today, I'll be creating new work using the Create Job panel. You can find the Create Job panel on the left here. For today's demo, I'll be creating a submission process for an environmental review. The work page will automatically update to show me the new job that is now ready for me to be worked on. And just like a regular submission process, I'll be asked to fill out some information here. We'll put in our name, the area that we'll be working in. You'll notice that the Proceed button is grayed out. This is because the required fields haven't been filled out. As soon as I fill out the required fields, the Proceed button will be enabled. Let's fill out all the other information that's on here. All right, we'll proceed to our next step. This is a real quick way to gather business-specific information related to our process. And not just that, you can also now quickly update default job properties like the start date, the due date, the priority, and status using this step. And everything that you see on here is all configured by my admin. While this feature is useful, we do recognize and understand that it may not fulfill all the needs for data validation. And so for that, at 10.9, we introduced integration with Survey123. This brings in all of the Survey123 capabilities like constraining, validating, and all the different fields that are supported by Survey123. You can see that my email address is being validated as I type. You can also add multiple pages, capture digital signature, and utilize all of the cool functionality offered by Survey123 without ever leaving Workflow Manager. Let's go ahead and sign our submission. And voila, my survey has now been submitted. Before we move on to the next step, I want to show you that when I submitted the survey, not only did it create a survey record, but it also linked the survey record with this job. And so you can see our first step that we filled out, and then the survey form that we filled out. This is useful because now these properties can be used anywhere in the workflow to act as an input for steps like emails, GP services, and guide a decision using arcade expression. And beyond Survey 1 to 3, this capability can be extended to integrate with feature layers as well. All right, we'll move on to defining a location now, and I'll pick an area that should be fairly wet. And locations don't always have to be polygons. They can be points, polylines. You can also select existing features to be the location for your job. All right, we'll move on to our next step here. Another new feature that we added at 10.9 is linked attachments. This can be a link to your shared or network drive, or link to an FTP or a OneDrive website. For this demo, I'll be adding an embedded attachment, which is a PDF document with information about my construction plan. Let's move on. Now, we've collected a lot of information in the past few minutes. Our location and properties will now be automatically evaluated to see if they're in proximity to any critical layers using a GP service. And looks like our area of construction is within 50 feet of wetland. And based on the result of my GP service, I will now be tasked to complete a few more steps and answer a few more questions here. So we'll go ahead and fill that out. And we'll move on to our next step. All right, now that our request is submitted, it looks like an email confirmation was sent out. Let's see if we actually got that email. This email was automatically sent out when our submission was submitted. As you can see, the email captured some of the job-related information like the job name, the proximity to the wetlands automatically.
All right, so I wanted to show that video because I just thought it did a really great job of demoing a workflow from the worker's perspective. So that would be somebody that is a worker that is involved in that submission process and has to take care of a couple of manual steps and then also allow some automated steps to take place as well. So I'll show a little bit later how we actually would go in and configure that. So back into my presentation, I just want to finish up a couple of things here. I want to mention that that is a submission and review workflow. Another very common workflow that this is designed to handle is data editing. So a common scenario might be that work submitted by a field crew, maybe they installed a new fire hydrant, and that's going to trigger a job request in Workflow Manager for somebody to handle the editing in of that fire hydrant into the actual database. And so that could involve both the Workflow Manager web application and then maybe also a job that gets passed into ArcGIS Pro and specifically shows somebody where and how to enter that into the system. So that's one common workflow. There is a really great YouTube video that shows a telecommunication solution. So this is a network design workflow. So if you're interested in that, you can search for that on YouTube, and I think I've actually included that on the resource slide towards the end of this presentation. The other thing is automated orchestration, and we already talked about this: submit, review, complete, deliver. There's a lot of aspects or workflows where maybe a human being does not need to be involved in any or even all of these steps. I know one of the counties I work with, for example, just had us help them with a Python script that evaluates CAD files that are submitted to the county. And it just essentially validates that the CAD file has been submitted in a format where all the symbology is appropriate and all the layers are labeled appropriately. So that's the kind of thing that maybe we just actually execute that script in an automated fashion, let it pass through, get updated into the feature layer that they have for where all that CAD data ends up. Or maybe it kicks it back out and says, hey, we need to send an email to this person, let them know that the file that they submitted is not quite right. And this is the thing that they have to actually fix within it. So these automated workflows are actually super powerful. I think lots of folks are running scripts and executing things, but we could actually execute those scripts and then have the next step take place without having to have a human involved, or at least maybe even make it easier so that when somebody shows up in the morning after those scripts execute, they have a set of jobs that they can just kind of step through to handle the next steps. And then I do want to show, I think I'm going to just go ahead and demo this very quickly. I know we only have a few minutes left, but the process for actually building what was demonstrated by Arthi in that video is anyone that's used our desktop technology, whether that's ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro, you're going to be very familiar with this interface for, it's essentially a very model builder interface for building out the steps within your workflow. So I think I'm going to go ahead and just with these last few minutes, jump into ArcGIS Enterprise. So this is a deployment of ArcGIS Enterprise that I have access to. And just like Arthi showed, I can jump into Workflow Manager here. But I also do want to point out, I mentioned on that one slide where we looked at the service-driven architecture, that there is now an item type that will become a component of your contents in ArcGIS Enterprise. So you can see I've got this AGIC workflow that I created earlier. I can click on that item. And then if I want to, I can actually go right from that item into Workflow Manager, and it will open up a similar web page to what Arthi showed. The difference being, if you were to go back and review that video, you would see that Arthi just had this work tab. As an administrator of these jobs, I have a couple of additional tabs here. So I can actually design the steps that actually take place with any of these given jobs. So I'll go ahead and click on this and just show you one example or a couple of examples maybe. But you can see here we've got this this workflow that is just an introduction to Workflow Manager, where it's really just intended as a default job to show essentially how to use the product. So just some simple things we're doing, like here, I'll get into this edit mode, where we're just saying welcome, which is basically kicking off the process. And we're adding some steps to just show you what can be done. So a skippable step, a step that you have to click to complete, maybe something that's automated, maybe some parallel steps. So maybe at the same time that we are sending an email to somebody to let them know that their request is under review, we're also sending it to other people to see if, to get approval from them, maybe based on a geospatial component or other just associated documentation. And then we can always loop back, which is kind of another cool aspect to this. So we can maybe define a location and then just kind of loop back and say, hey, do we need to modify that? Maybe send it over to somebody else to verify. We kind of step through these things, and you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, this is where we have all these options that we can drag and drop. So we can drag these on and then, kind of use arrows like we would in Model Builder to connect anything. So that's basically the general workflow to establish these jobs. Another good example here, this would be a route edit example where we enter a work ID, we define the location, and then step through a common workflow where we create a version, maybe do some editing, maybe loop back through that editing to confirm it's good, and then finally just reconcile post and do some cleanup. And then, once we get through that, we can create our jobs and then go to a manage screen where we can actually see all the jobs that have been deployed. We've got some basic charting out of the box with this. And then just like Arthi did, we can start our work. And so we can actually click on these things and begin the work there. And I notice I just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to jump back into my presentation here and just mention I guess the last thing before I jump into questions is just the roadmap for this is pretty exciting. As I mentioned, the development team behind this is really trying to do this gradually and do it right. Anyone that's been following the development of this service-driven architecture, there was rumors of it going back 3 or 4 years. I remember at the UC probably about 4 years ago now, hearing about it, but it really took a long time in development to get a product out. And I think it's because of the intent to do this right, because this service-driven architecture that really is kind of the foundation of the way our system works in the modern era. They really want to be able to do it right because they know it's going to be around for a long time. So there's lots of exciting things. On the near term, I wanted to point out the ability to send web requests through steps or triggered by system activities. Some really nice enhancements to the pro capabilities, being able to run add-ins, enhanced mapping, those kinds of things. In the midterm, folks that are familiar with Survey 123 and the webhook integration that we have there, and you're starting to see that in other parts of our system as well. I think that's either incorporated or very close to being incorporated with field maps and other applications that we have. That's on the midterm roadmap. And then I think this is very exciting is at some point this is going to be available in ArcGIS Online. And I think that's really going to open up these types of workflows to a lot of users, a lot of different size organizations. So that's a pretty exciting thing. So with that, I guess I'll kind of wrap up here. I do have some resources. I can share this this PowerPoint presentation with anyone that's interested. And I'll move on to, I'll actually leave that one up. So I can move on to questions. I see one in the chat window. Jamie, it looks like somebody asked, how is this different than Workforce? Right. So that's a great question. And there's actually integration on the roadmap for Workflow Manager with Workforce. So Workforce is very specific to, there is a field app component to that. So a mobile device application that's available on iOS and Android. And then there's a dispatcher view. And that's very specific to, you put a point on the map and you are trying to get somebody in the field to go to that location to do some specific work. So it's very specific to that dispatcher field worker workflow. And that can be very useful in Workflow Manager because that could be a step within the larger Workflow Manager to be able to, maybe perform edits, maybe update some documents on the desktop, those kinds of things, but then maybe also get somebody to a location to do some work. Maybe they submit their Workforce assignment as completed, and that kicks off a series of automated steps within Workflow Manager. So Workforce is very specific to that dispatcher field worker, whereas I think Workflow Manager encompasses a lot more, but it will eventually be able to also make use of Workforce assignments as part of the larger job. And there's a question. Oh, this is a really good question. So all the questions are good, but can this replace Integromat for workflows that that run reports and send emails? Yeah, I think it could. I think there's a lot of overlap with what a webhook does, including Integromat or Power Automate, and what you could do in Workflow Manager. So I don't think it necessarily needs to replace it. If you have a really good workflow established with Integromat and it runs well, there's no need necessarily to stand up Workflow Manager specifically for that. But I think what this does is open up the options that you have available so that you could go either direction depending on what you've got deployed and what's easier in any given circumstance or project that you're working on. Can attachments be sent in emails? That is a question I would have to follow up on. I don't know who sent that, but I'm not really sure about that. I would imagine if you can't currently that would be on the roadmap because that seems like a very important thing. Can you give us a time estimates on midterm? Yeah, I would say 1 to 2 years with midterm sounds about right. So near term is probably within the next 2 quarters. It means that they're actively working on it and they're trying to get it probably even into the next release. If not, it'll get pushed to the one after that. So that, we release usually quarterly with these types of products. So the midterm, I would say 1 to 2 years would be very good. And the one caveat I will say with those roadmaps is they are definitely subject to change. So if there's anything specific, any specific functionality that you are wanting, you can always email me and I can send an email to the product management team to find out for sure about specific features and functionality.
Okay, so this is Jamie. It looks like that was the last question that came in there. I did post your email address in the response to that was Bridget Johanning asking about needing assistance to set up a meeting with you if you could help her with a special project she's working on.
Okay.
So I don't know if you just want to like say your email address in case people don't read that in the Q&A or don't see it.
Yeah, so I have a somewhat unusual email address in the grand scheme of Esri emails, but it's Joseph_Peters@esri.com. So JOSEPH_PETERS@ESRI.com.
Yeah, and I apologize, everyone. I would have put that into the chat, but it closed automatically right at
Oh,
noon.
yes.
So the Q&A
I've
was
seen that
still
happen.
So, yeah, the Q&A was still open. Anyway, so well, thank you, Joe. This has been like an amazing session. It's just really cool to see all the great work and so many tips. I mean, you crammed how to do this and all this getting started with this workflow manager in such a short time and all these resources. So I know this is going to be really valuable.
Excellent. Yeah,
and
I see a lot of customers that have workflows that this would just be so ideal for. So if anyone feels the same way, definitely reach out to me so we can talk about it offline. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
That sounds great. And thank you, everyone. Please don't forget to complete the feedback survey. There's a link to it on the right side of the page. And you can also come back and respond to provide feedback for any of the sessions you've attended through the link that's on the homepage of this, your attendee website. And with that, I want to thank everyone and especially thank our presenters for coming and presenting for us, and have a great rest of